Hey everybody, Connie here today at etrailer.com. Today we're going to be going over and showing you how to install the Airlift LoadLifter XL airbags here on our 2019 Ram 3500. So here's what our airbags are going to look like installed. As you can see, everything is bolt on. We don't have to do any drilling. We have our lower bracket here, which is attaches to the axle as well as the leaf spring perch. And then we have our upper bracket here with bolts onto the frame. Now to give you a little bit of comparison of the part we removed, which pretty much takes this place, we have our factory jounce spring here. As you can see right away, there's a pretty big difference here. So normally with a factory jounce spring, before this would even work, we'd have to be sagging pretty far. However, with our airbags here, we can set them up so they're engaged automatically. So these airbags here are going to be an excellent option for our Ram 3500. They're going to provide some benefits if we find ourselves to be towing a lot or we're just hauling around heavy loads. Now essentially what these are going to do, they're going to be a rear suspension enhancement. Therefore, they're going to beef up our rear suspension so we're not sagging as much when we have all that weight in the bed. So say we were to go ahead and hook up to our fifth wheel trailer, we had a nice heavy trailer on there and we didn't have any airbags. What you're going to notice is the rear end of the truck is going to drop down and the front end of the truck is going to raise up. Now, you may not be aware of it, but that's actually going to cause quite a few problems depending on the severity of the squat we have in the rear. So number one, the most thing that people really don't realize is that when we have our truck squatted in the rear, the front end of our truck, as we said, is actually going to lift up. And basically what this does is this is going to drastically reduce our stopping power. We don't want to take any weight off the front axle because that's where the majority of our braking is going to come from. About 60% of our truck's braking is going to come from the front axle. So when we take that weight off there and transfer it to the rear, we're definitely going to be reducing our stopping power. So something else you'll notice when we shift that weight back to the rear is that we're actually going to be taking weight off the front axle. Therefore, our camber of our tires is going to bow outward. And what this does is it's basically going to create issues that we have with irregular tire wear. Therefore, we're going to be spending time and money replacing our tires much sooner than we would have normally. So back here in the rear, since we're really going to be flexing out that suspension, really making it dip down, perhaps even riding on the bump stops, we're definitely going to be wearing out the existing suspension components sooner. Therefore, again, we're going to have to spend more time and money replacing these a lot sooner than we would have normally. So in regards to beefing up the rear suspension on a Ram here, you do have more than one options. There are tons of them out there, such as Timbrins, which are a hard rubber spring that replace the jounce bumper. We have Sumo springs, Roadmasters, there's tons of them really. But the Airlift airbags, these ones in particular, are really going to stand apart from its competitors because they're adjustable. Meaning we can adjust the amount of air inside the bags based on any given load we may have. This is going to allow us to get the perfect sort of compromise between support and comfort. So the particular airbags we have installed on this Ram 3500 here today are the XL model, which have a 7,500 pound weight capacity. Now, if you don't think you need that much, there is a smaller standard version, which offers a 5,000 pound weight capacity. So in regards to installation, these are going to actually be something you guys can do at home by yourselves. We really don't need any special tools, and there isn't going to be any cutting or drilling required. Therefore, there will be no modifications needed to our vehicle. So now before we install our airbags or before we get any weight in the truck bed, we're just going to go ahead and take some baseline measurements here. At the rear, we're going to measure from the ground to the top inside edge of the wheel well. For the rear here, that's going to be about 43 inches. Now let's move up to the front and take that measurement as well. So at the front of the vehicle, if we take that same measurement, we're going to get about 39.5. So now we've got our water container here in the truck bed with approximately 1,500 pounds or so. Let's go ahead and retake our measurements so we can see how they changed. So at the rear here, we're going to measure about 41 inches, so it looks like we dropped about 2 inches in the rear. Let's head up to the front now. And we're at about 38.5 inches, so it looks like it dropped around a half inch or so. So now that we've got our measurements, we've seen the difference, let's go ahead and take our truck out on the test course and see how it handles. So now we're going to arrive at our speed bump course here. Let's go ahead and take our truck through here with our weight in our bed without any airbags, see how it feels. It's definitely jumping around a little bit back there. We're getting some bouncing back and forth, side to side. Definitely feeling some effects of that weight. Now we're going to head over to our slalom course here. Do some invasive maneuvers once we get up to speed. Yeah, so we can definitely feel that body roll increase a little bit there. So the body is rocking back and forth side to side on our chassis there. It's not as planted as it would normally be. So now that we're done with our test course, let's go ahead and head inside the shop here and pop our airbags on. So the first step of our installation, we're going to come underneath our truck here. And if we come directly above our rear axle, we're going to see the factory Jount spring, which needs to be removed. Sort of this triangle shaped bumper that we see here. In order to remove this, we're going to have one bolt on either side. It helps if we go ahead beforehand and we spray down the threads up top here with some lubricant. But then we're going to take a 16mm socket. We're going to remove both those bolts so we can remove the Jount spring, as it won't be reinstalled. So now that we have the Jount spring removed, we're going to come over here and start assembling some of our brackets. We're going to take one of our roll plates here. You can see the beveled edge that's going to be facing down towards the airbag. We'll simply line up our holes like so. Then we're going to take our upper bracket here. Now keep in mind, these are labeled left and right for the driver and passenger side, so we do want to make sure of that, which one we're using and which side we're working on. We're going to be working on the passenger side, so we're going to be using the 1R. What we need to do is we need to go up and line up our holes here. Have one hole here, one hole here. We have the oblong cutout here for the inflation port. Go ahead and line those up. And then in our kit here, we're going to have our fine threaded bolts. We're going to need to place a lock washer over there along with a flat washer. And we'll thread these in on both sides. Then we'll torque them down to the specifications in our instructions. Now we're going to take our 90-degree inflation valve. We're going to go ahead and thread that in to the port on our airbag here. We're going to tighten it down with a 9/16" wrench. Now keep in mind, we don't want to tighten it all the way. We just want to engage the thread locker there. So a few turns to get that in there should be all that's needed. So now we're going to flip our air spring assembly upside down. We're going to take another roll plate here, making sure the beveled edge is down, set that on there, and then we're going to grab our lower bracket here. Now we need to pay attention to our lower bracket. We see these two angled flanges down here. These need to install in the airbag. You can only install this way or this way. We need to make sure that they're opposite of the inflation port. So if we reach under there, the inflation port is going to be on this side, therefore the flanges need to be on this side. But before we set the lower plate on, we're going to take our carriage bolts here. There's going to be some square holes in our bracket there. We need to go ahead and feed those through real quick. And then we can go ahead and set the plate on, line up our holes, and install our hardware here. It's the same hardware we used to secure the top bracket. We have a lock washer and then a flat washer. These, however, we're only going to be tightening down hand tight for now. So now that we have the frame lifted off the axle here, we're going to go ahead and take our airbag assembly and lift it up into place. Just like that. So now that we have the air spring assembly in place, what we're going to do is now I'm just going to make sure we're pushing it all the way against the leaf spring stack. Once we do that, we can take our U-bolt here, we're going to wrap it around the back of the leaf spring stack, and then align our holes here, one on either side. Once we get those in there, we'll take our serrated flange nuts and just loosely thread those on. So now we're going to take our axle clamp bracket, we're going to place it over our two carriage bolts here and secure it up to the bottom of the axle. Then we're going to come back with our same 3/8 serrated flange nuts, just loosely thread those on. We want to make sure that we thread them down evenly, even just by hand. So once we have our U-bolt in place, we're actually going to be torquing down these two flange nuts here to an amount specified in the instructions. We want to make sure that we tighten them evenly, working our way back from side to side. Now, in order to torque these down, as you can see, we don't have a lot of room here. We're going to need a 9/16 inch crow's foot adapter. However, if you don't have one, it isn't a common tool, so if you do not have one, just do the best you can to get it as close to the factory spec as possible. Now that we have the U-bolts torqued, we can go ahead and tighten and torque our carriage bolts as well. We're going to be using a 14 or a 9/16 inch socket for this. Again, we want to make sure that we're tightening evenly back and forth, alternating from side to side. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to lower the frame back onto our rear axle here. As you can see, our airbag is compressed now. What we're going to do is we're going to take the brace that comes in our kit here, along with our hex bolts, the black ones. We're going to go ahead and install this. The brace is going to go up in sort of this pocket here. We're going to have holes in the frame as well as holes in our bracket we need to line up. It does matter, however, which direction we put the brace. We want the L shape. This is going to be facing the frame, so it's going to install up there like so. Let's go ahead and put our bolts in there first and then drop it into place. So we may need to maneuver our brackets a little bit to get everything to line up, but once done so, our bolts should drop down like so. Now we'll take the yellow zinc coated Nylock nuts and washers. We'll go ahead and place those over our bolts that we just installed. I'm going to use my hand at the top to make sure that I'm not pushing the bolt back up through the hole. Now let's go ahead and snug these up. So again, we'll be using a 14 or 9/16 inch socket and wrench in order to tighten these up. Now we'll take our torque wrench here and torque down our two bolts to our factory spec. So now finally we have our two bolts here on the bottom, securing our bag to that lower bracket. Again, we'll take a 14 or 9/16 inch wrench. We'll tighten those both down. There actually is no torque spec for these because you can't get a torque wrench on them. So we're just going to tighten them until our crush washer collapses. That should be good. So now we're going to take our air lines here. We already have the valves, the airlift installed for us on the end. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to find about the midway point of this line here. Doesn't need to be exact, but once we get the midpoint around here, we're going to go ahead and cut it in half. I want to make sure that we're making cuts as straight as possible because that can lead to leaks if we cut it at an angle. So now we're going to take our airline here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the end we just cut. I'm going to put it into one of our inflation valves. It doesn't matter which side we start with. What we need to do is once we insert that airline into the fitting, we want to make sure it's centered. We want to push in and then pull out to lock it in place. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take the rest of our airline and we're going to run it back to our bumper there, making sure we avoid any moving components such as the suspension or any heat components such as the exhaust. We also want to make sure that we have a little bit of a flex on our line because our suspension will be traveling up and down with our bags, so we want to make sure that line can move freely. So now that we have both of our lines ran here to the bumper with our inflation valves, the next step would be to go ahead and mount these. Now we have a couple different options. A lot of people just like to drill a couple holes here in the little license plate well. We can certainly do that. Or up top here, the two screws that secure our license plate. There's a little plastic fastener in there. We could just pop that out and use that pre-drilled hole. Really just depends where you want to mount them. For this particular truck though, we're actually going to be installing an air compressor kit, so we won't be using these manual inflation valves. We are, however, going to make a video of that, so if you want to check that out, feel free to do so. But I think at this time, we're just going to go ahead and pressurize the system and check everything for leaks. Now we're going to go ahead and spray down all of our fittings and lines with a soapy water solution. If there are leaks, we're going to see some rapid forming bubbles, and in which case we'd want to recut the line or retighten the fitting. So now we have our airbags installed. We've got some air in them. We went ahead and put our container back in the truck bed here. Now let's go ahead and retake our measurements so we can see how much they've changed. So for the rear here, we're at about 43 inches from the ground to the bottom edge of our wheel well. If we remember, that was actually our factory ride height. So we are back to factory ride height here with our airbags and our water container. Let's go ahead and head up to the front and see what we have there. So for the front, we're about 39.5 inches. So again, we're back to the factory ride height. So now let's head back over to our speed bump course here with our airbags installed. We're definitely not getting jolted around side to side as much. It is a little bit more stable back there. Definitely feel a little bit more confident. So now we're going to pick up here on our slalom course, get up to speed and make some evasive maneuvers. So yeah, we can feel that weight a little bit there, but it's definitely not jarting us around side to side as much. We don't have near as much body roll as we did before. And that's going to do it, guys, for our look and installation of the LoadLifter XL airbags here on our 2019 Ram 3500.